All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back for another day of Code Platoon in the front end module. Today, we're going to be learning about utility and component libraries. Now, there's we've been learning over the last couple of days how to style our website, how to make our actual CSS ourselves, and kind of alter our own components manually. But for development purposes, somebody went ahead and put together these libraries that would allow developers to apply styling onto their site a lot faster and apply some custom design onto their components without them having to do it themselves. With that said, has anyone ever heard of Tailwind CSS or BootStrap for React? I have. Okay, great. Yeah, it seems like a couple of people have heard of it before. Has anyone ever used it for any of their projects? Okay, well, that's good because today we're going to learn how to integrate Tailwind CSS with our React projects. So let's go ahead and go into our lesson here. And let's start learning a little bit about attaching Tailwind into React. So I'm going to go ahead and create a project. Components. I'm going to choose the React language in JavaScript. I'm going to change directory into my utility and components folder, where I can see that my package.json is located. Run npm install. And then we can run npm run dev. All right, so now that we run our development server, we can open up React. Oh, that's not where I wanted to open up. There we go. All right. Now we can see we have our React project actually rendering. Let's empty out this template real quick. We're going to go ahead and go into app CSS. We don't want none of this. We're going to go into app.jsx. Same thing. We don't want any of this HTML. Maybe we could do like an H1 saying hello, Victor. And then finally, we could go into index.css and get rid of all this styling. Okay, now we have our regular site. We have hello, Victor on it with the default margin that's being provided by the body. It's all within app.jsx. And maybe we could even take off strict mode. Okay. So now our React project's ready to go. Well, what if I wanted to install actual Tailwind into my React project? And it might be useful if we go to Tailwind. Okay, so here's the Tailwind library. It kind of tells us what they do. We can see that they're not utilizing something like regular CSS, right? And look at their example here that's animated. So we have that picture. We can see that they're adding small things, right? Like rounded, full, max auto. None of these are actual CSS styling that we've seen before, but they are default to Tailwind. And once we install Tailwind, we'll have access to these classes that will essentially conduct CSS for us and move the images around whatever way we want them to. All right, we can see who created it, how it works. They have a couple of examples here. But the main thing that we care about is installation. So we can take a look at installation. And here it tells us what to do. So install Tailwind CSS. And here's how to install via npm. And it tells us a little bit of configuration that we need to do in order for it to work properly. So we're currently here inside of our actual Vite project. And what we want to do is we want to run the npm install command. We want it to be -d. Okay, just making sure. Tailwind CSS post CSS auto prefixer. Now, this is a little bit different than what's located on the site, right? The site just tells us, hey, this is all you should need to run. Now, the reason why we need this post CSS auto prefixer is because we're working with something like Vite. If we're working in a purely React project and we did something like create React app rather than utilizing Vite, then we could just run this regular command that it provides for us. But because we're utilizing Vite, we need to specify that we want the post CSS with the auto prefixer. Okay, so now once I run this, that's going to install Tailwind. And now that that's done, we need to initialize the Tailwind module. Now, we haven't utilized this command before. To initialize modules or create the actual behavior that we have just installed into some sort of a node package, we need to utilize npx, not npm. It still goes into the node package module manager, right? But this one is for initializing. So we'll go ahead and say that we want to initialize Tailwind CSS, which I've just installed. And I'm going to specify that I want to initialize here. Okay, so now it tells me, all right, it's been initialized. We created a Tailwind CSS configuration file, and we created a post CSS configuration file. So let's take a look at those. Here we can see that we have a post CSS configuration file. Let me close all the other white noise that we have here. And we also have a Tailwind.configuration file. Right, so both of these exist now, just like they told me. And now I'm able to alter both of them. Well, in the Tailwind configuration file, it has been generated. We want to add a following content. So currently right now, it knows the plugins that it's supposed to be working with. It knows it's working with Tailwind CSS, that there's some sort of auto prefixer. But it doesn't know where it's supposed to be working or what it's supposed to be looking for. So we have to add a section named content. And this section, oh, I apologize. This is the wrong file. Here we go. So again, it knows some of the things that we're working with here. It has the plugins, and here's the theme. We'll go into theme here shortly. But here within content, we need to specify where is it that it's supposed to be looking, or what files is it supposed to be working with. Well, if I look at my directory, within the same directory of utility and components where tailwind.configuration is located, I have index.html. So I want to make sure that it's working with index.html. And what other things do I want it to be working with? Well, I want it to be working with all of the files within my source. All right, so it's going to go into all directories within my source component. So I'm going to be able to utilize it anywhere in here. If I have a components directory, which I'll create now, it's going to also be able to go into components because the ** means all. Right, so it's going to open up source and it knows that it's supposed to work with all of the directories or files located in here. Okay, great. But now it needs to know what kind of files is it allowed to work with. And again, I'm just going to utilize the * method to tell it, I want you to work with all kinds of files. And they are all of these files are going to end with JS, TS, JSX, or TSX. Now we're not utilizing TSX or TS, so we may not need it, but this is coming straight from the directions from the site itself. So let's leave it on there for now. And then once we get it working, maybe we could experiment a little bit. All right, so now Tailwind knows that it's going to work with index.html. which is located here. It also knows that it's going to work with all the files or directories within the source folder that end with JS, TS, JSX, or TSX. Does anyone have any questions about how the installation of Tailwind works so far?
Could you go over just the difference with like I know you explained that putting like the slash D for when we install Tailwind, but how come you put auto prefixer but the doc doesn't say? I guess I missed why what the auto prefixer does.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I believe you're talking about the installations up here.
I think it was like the first one you ran, the npm install -d Tailwind CSS.
There it is. npm install, but it doesn't show me the rest of it. Rough. Oh, no, here we go. So post CSS auto prefixer. Now, exactly what they do, I would have to look it up and be able to give you the correct answer as to what each one of these commands do. But the reason why we need to add the post CSS and auto prefixer is so that it's able to work with Vite. When Vite compiles, it needs to have this information already provided to it so that it's installed correctly inside of package lock JSON, and it grabs the correct node modules to add into the node modules of the package. All right, so now we can see here. Where'd you go? Well, with all the installations that we have now, which is literally just Vite and this, I got all of these node modules now. Right, where initially I would not have this many node modules. But
Okay.
it's actually just a detailed installation saying, hey, specifically, this is what we need.
Gotcha.
Any other questions?
When I tried to do the npx init, did I look at it wrong, or did you have a dash p there?
I do have a dash P.
Okay. Oh, but it's after the init. Okay. Thank you.
Of course. All right. So now I have this information. Well,
Hey Francisco,
oh,
what is the dash P for?
yeah, that's a good question. So the dash P flag, let's see. Let's see. So it's a TypeScript compatible flag. And it basically takes anything that is TypeScript and it compiles it, apparently. So when you run something with TypeScript, TypeScript essentially gets compiled as JavaScript. So then in order for a JavaScript file or a JavaScript project to be able to read the TypeScript, you have to compile the TypeScript first. So more than likely the Tailwind library here is coming in TypeScript, and that's why we have to utilize the dash P flag. Does that answer your question, Andrew?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. Okay, so now let's take a look at some Tailwind CSS here. How do we add this into our project? Well, you would think that this should be enough to add it, right? But just like when you're importing anything, for example, if I want to use something like Google Fonts, which I'm sure we've seen before, if not yet, Google Fonts. Whenever I want to utilize any of these, it's going to tell me that I need to import it. Right? I could look at the imports, and it's going to give me an import statement for how to import the specific font into my CSS styling. Well, just like it works like that with Google, it also works in this way whenever I'm utilizing Tailwind. So I need to tell Tailwind inside of index.css that it's going to reference Tailwind grab the base, grab components, and it's going to grab utilities. Okay, so now it has all three of those. It's going to tell me that it doesn't know about Tailwind. So let's check out our package.json really quick. So it does know about Tailwind. So this should be working correctly for now, but I guess we should find out here soon. So currently I have this H1 element. I can start adding a couple of things to this H1 element. And there's also a couple of extensions that get recommended inside of our curriculum. If you guys want to utilize Tailwind, definitely recommended getting this, getting these extensions to help you kind of scaffold the different Tailwind styles that you want to add there. But let's take a look here. Let's say we wanted to have something like adding red text. I'm trying to see a better example here. It looks like it goes over how to create your custom classes first. So let's do something like that. We're going to go ahead and create a custom class called text red. And what this is going to do is it's going to create colors that is red. Oh, totally forgot to put that there. All right. Now, if I go over to my app.jsx, I currently have this H1 element, which I am now going to change for a p tag. And now I'm going to go ahead and add the class of text red. So now when I run my development server, I should see a p tag with text red. Utility class or text in your source file. Okay, and then right now Tailwind is telling me, hey, you're currently not using me, just letting you know if you are trying to use me, you're currently not actually accessing me. Well, now if I wanted to change the font size, Tailwind actually gives me a way of doing that. I could give it something like -500. And that should have changed the font size. Interesting. Let me make sure that Tailwind is connected correctly really quick. Okay, so Tailwind is connected correctly. So that's good. So currently we have this border red. We created it ourselves, and maybe our own CSS is what's interacting with it. That's why we don't see it. Why is this example not working? Let's see. What if I change this into blue? Okay, there you go. So now we created my own custom class that I commented out, right? Because this is something that I did myself. But now if I want to use something like Tailwind to be able to style my components, instead of changing the colors myself, I could just add the classes here. I could make the text blue. I'm sure I could make it black or any other color that I need to. Now the 500 portion, I'm pretty sure that I thought that had to do with size, but it doesn't seem like it does. But there's a couple of other things like we can do. We can turn it into, I think we could do something like size BG or something like that. Or big. I'm gonna have to do a little bit of review with my.
Doesn't need like the pixels or like what size? Like 500 px or something maybe?
Maybe it doesn't actually have it
Right.
PX in there. Let me see if I take it off, what happens. I see. So. Got it. So it's a different shade of how purple it is that you want it. All right. So right now, text purple at 300 kind of shows me this like fuchsia color, fuchsia, however you say it. If I turn it into something like 500, it turns into a more solid purple, right? And I don't think I could go anything. Oh, can't go above. Let's see what happens if I go 1000. Okay. So that's where we cut it off.
So if you put the 500 like after text, does it change the size?
Yeah, let's try it out. There's a different command for changing the text and the text size. I think it's just BG.
Chat GPT saying it's text dash, and then you can do like LG for large or
Oh, there you go. So you specify that you want to grab the text and then you can make it large. And I'm assuming small is SM. And then medium would just be what already comes with it.
So it doesn't work then if you like string it all together. You have to be like specific with like each styling, I guess.
Right.
It's off a class name. Gotcha.
Each individual class comes with its own styling components, so you have to separate them individually. Right. And then you could also give it something like slate. Let me see where to go. Let's see what this one does. All right, so that gave it an entire background color that we can see. It's coming in colors. I think this is the color slate, I wonder. So this is background. Here's the color. I can turn it red. I don't know what other colors I can think of. Let's go with gray. And then maybe instead of 500, I want it to be something lighter. So I'm gonna go with 300. All right, but that's a lot faster than me actually going into CSS and saying, hey, turn this specific shade of color. And then afterwards, I want you to make the text a little bit bigger and I want you to be gray. Now, the other cool thing about Tailwind is that it is reactive. So now, regardless of what dimension I turn this into, we can see that the text is not occupying a already set size, some sort of like 500 pixels or anything like that. It's actually adapting to the different screen sizes that I'm switching in between. All right, so I can make it responsive. As the screen gets bigger, the text gets a little bigger until it finally meets its stopping point where it's not able to change anymore. Okay, so now we have our hello Victor. What other things can our CSS do? Well, we can talk about the box model real quick. Sorry, was there a question here? Okay, so now we can talk about the box model real quick. Let's go ahead and make a couple of boxes, and then we'll go into how we can style them in different ways. Make it a div. Box. And let's just give it a class name box here. What's already coming with a header? Okay, so usually with our box model, we can specify the type of borders of what we want, but let's go ahead and apply all sides, right? Let's say I wanted a border here. Well, what I can do is I can specify, hey, I want this to be a border, and maybe I just want it to be 5. It's not giving me that. What about -2? There you go. Okay, so now we can see our border there. If I do something like -1, it should be lighter. Okay, -2 gives me this great box. So it seems to only work with even numbers. Between 2 and 4. Interesting. So we can give it our border of 2. It gives us a border automatically. It looks like we could also give it color, or we can actually just access whichever sides we want, right? If we wanted it to just be on the bottom, I can do border B for bottom. And now we can see our border has only moved to the bottom. And let me just comment out this P tag up here so that we can see it. If I wanted to give it a margin, I could give it a margin to all sides. And maybe I could give it something like 10. Now we can see it has a margin of 10 all around it, right? So now we can see our border 5. If I only wanted a margin to apply to the bottom, I could say margin, bottom, and then, I don't know, maybe 15. Well, we won't be able to see that one. Maybe I can do margin top. Okay, so it seems like this margin top isn't able to interact with this margin bottom. Oh, it's because I am calling the wrong command. It's margin top. There you go. So now if I change this back to something like 5, and I make this into 10, we can see that the margin up top is being applied and that the margin on the left and right hand side has a 5. So now I can also do something like padding. I can interact with the border and interact with the pixel of the border as well. If I wanted to do something like right and left, I can specify border X, and that would be left and right. Right, we can see it here, both on my left and right hand corner. If I want to do something like top and bottom, I would just do border Y. Now we can see top and bottom. And again, if I just wanted to have border in all sides, then I would just specify border -2, and we can see the border all the way around. Now let's take a look at this component real quick so that we can see the styling that's coming within it. So now here's our styling. I click on the border and it tells me that border 2 means that the border width has 2 pixels. Right? I see that I have a margin top of 2.5 rem, a margin all around by default of 1.25 rem, and that's coming from the M5. What else do we got here? And I think that's it. And then we have our 2 pixel for the border width, which is what matches the 2 right here on border. Right, so now if I wanted something like, let's say we wanted to create a button, I can bring this button here straight from our notes. And we can see that this button, so PX, that's saying padding on the left and right hand side, will be 5. PY, that means the padding from top to bottom will be 1. We can see the padding here. And then we can see that it's utilizing the same component of border 2. So let's take a look at it. Again, the padding, PY, it means that the padding top is 0.25. The padding bottom is 0.25. When we utilize PX, it's telling me the padding on the left-hand side is 1.25, and the padding on the right-hand side is 1.25. So that's how we mess around with boxes. All the tools are there. You could also look at the Tailwind CSS documentation to try to figure out the other types of, here we go. Here's the one we're using. You could also look at their documentation to figure out the other stylings that they have. I think they have that here. Let me check it out. Nope, those are components. Don't want that. Okay, so they have a playground available for you as well, but that's not necessarily what I'm looking for. Okay, I'll find it and I'll send out the link to everyone. That way everyone has it easily accessible. But there's a breakdown of each one of these classes. Oh, I think Kate just shared a cheat sheet over how to utilize Tailwind CSS. Thank you so much, Kate. I really appreciate that. All right. So now there's positioning, right? We've already talked about positioning before, but let's break this one down as well. So now let's say we have a division, and this division holds some sort of text inside of it. All right, something like, let's go back to our classical hello Victor. Okay, well, how do I make this division center hello Victor? Well, same thing as before, right? We would want this division to cover the entire screen, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to tell it, hey, we want your, and let me add the class name. We want your width to be full. And we also want the height to be full. Now this is going to cover full of its parent, right? So when I hover over it, we're going to see that it's only highlighting so much. But again, that's because in the root is also being limited. So let me fix that through index.css here. Let me just grab the root component, and I believe that's by ID. And let me make this 100. Oh. Width, 100 view width, and then height, 100 view height. Okay, so now if I take a look at root, the root's the entire view width and the entire view height. And when I take a look at my division that I just created, well, now my division that has W full and H full is also the entire width and the entire height of my console. So now instead of doing the whole 100% or 100 VW or VH, by just saying width full and height full, I'm telling it you're going to occupy the entire height and the entire width of my actual, of your parent division. Okay, well, now that I have this, how do I make this center? Well, just like we have display flex, this also has a flex property that I can add into it. And maybe we could add multiple elements really quick just so that we can see that. No, it's not going to work. Okay, so currently we can see both of these are right next to each other. If I take off the flex, we see that they drop, right? I have two p tags, each one of them with their own margin and their own specific CSS. But the moment I turn it into flex is essentially the same as in going into my actual CSS styling and saying display flex. Well, now I can also say something like, hey, I want you to flex this in a row format. So I'm giving it a flex direction of row. I could change this into a flex direction of column. Or at least I thought I could. I'll have to take a look into the specific section, but we can definitely change the flex direction. All right. In this case, we have it in row. And then I can justify the content, just like I showed it yesterday, and make it center. Now we can see all of our content is being centered. And then I can also align items center. Now we can see that our text or two paragraph tags within our division is now occupying 100% of the screen, and it's showing the elements within the division centered. All right, if I just take one of them off, it's going to go ahead and bring them centered. Go ahead, Robert.
Yeah, just quick question. The order that you place the class names in there, does that matter at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's check it out. Well, I would say that some of them do and some of them don't, right? So for example, this flex needs to exist before flex row exists. And this justify content and align items seems like it needs to exist prior to the remainder. But let's try it out. What happens if I switch these back and forth? So it looks like when it interprets this code, it's able to grab all of this styling and compile it all together regardless of the order. Does that answer your question, Robert?
Yeah, good to know. Thank you.
All right. So now we already talked about the color schemes. We talked about how we can alternate the brightness between those color schemes. But let's take a look at what we got here. I'm going to go ahead and comment this example out. And I'm going to bring back our button that we have recently created. All right, so currently I have this button. It says click me, and it has all of these padding inside of it. All right, well, let's say that my padding from left to right, I only want it to be 2. I want my padding from up and down to still be 1. And I still want my border to be 2. Well, now I can change a little bit of its color schema. So let's say I want it to be a blue text and put it at 500. Oh. Okay, so now we can see that the text has turned blue, right? I can also change it to where my background color is also blue, but instead of having it being dark blue, I can specify that I want it to be light blue. All right, so here we have my dark blue of the text. I have a background color where I have light blue behind it. And then I could even give my border a color by giving it blue. And then maybe my border, I want it to be dark as well. So I turn it into 500. Or maybe I want it to be something darker than the text inside. So I turn it into 700. Right. And there we can see they're all the same. They're all the color blue, but they're different shades of blue. Right. Where 200 being lighter, and the higher the number goes, the darker the color gets on the outside. Any classes, any questions on any of this?
Yeah, Francisco. So with Tailwind CSS, would you always do it inline, or could you like name that class and then access it from a different location?
Yeah.
Just to kind of keep that file clean.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was just saying to keep that file clean.
Yeah, so if I wanted to keep this file clean, when it comes to Tailwind, right, most of this information is coming straight from Tailwind CSS. So I want to make sure that I make these classes within Tailwind. I wonder if there's something that I can do here. Maybe I can do something like, I don't know. This is completely experimental, so I'm not sure if it will work. I wonder if I'm able to call these classes from within. It doesn't look like it's gonna let me. Oh. Yeah, so it doesn't look like it lets me call classes. Let me see if there's a way that I could do it. Hmm. Yeah, so it doesn't look like it's gonna let me in. It's going to let me be able to do it. But what I can do is, I guess I could add it all in here, maybe. I would have to do a little bit of research to see how I could chain them all together. But to answer your question directly, when you're applying CSS, you want to actually call the classes themselves. Since each one of these classes is coming straight from Tailwind, we don't have the ability to alter them directly. But what we can do if we want to change something about them, so for example, this border 2, right? If we take a look at our Vite project and we go take a look at the element, when I look at the styles within it, and I come down to the border, we can see that the border is 2 pixels. Right? Well, if I wanted that border to be more, what I can do is I can call the class name of border 2. And I can override it myself. And I can say that means border gray, and I can make it 5 pixels. Right, but notice that just messed up my entire CSS file, right? Maybe I could just not pass in the color. There you go. So now I can specify, hey, this, if I use the class border 2, I know what Tailwind is bringing to the table, and Tailwind is telling it that it's going to be 2, right? But now we can see that border 2 pixels get scratched out. And if I scroll down, I think I'll be able to find my own CSS class somewhere. Maybe it's at the top. There you go. So now you can see my own border 2 being created with a different parameter being passed into it. So I can overwrite what Tailwind is passing on to me. But when it comes to giving each class to a property, I would have to do it this way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Of course. All right, are there any questions over Tailwind or anything that I've covered so far?
I have one.
Go ahead.
I guess this is more like job. Is this preferable to CSS then? Or like vanilla CSS, I should say.
Got it. So you're saying, is this, you know, the most developers actually utilize Tailwind CSS or do they utilize vanilla CSS, right? And I think it just comes down to preference. Whatever delivers the quickest and the most maintainable code for whatever it is that you're trying to create, then that's what you should use, right? Sometimes Tailwind CSS might be perfect. Maybe they want you to just add a button to a website that they want a specific color, and when you hover over it, you want it to be bright. Then maybe Tailwind CSS might be the right tool for you. But maybe sometimes they want you to create something that actually takes, a custom font that only belongs to the company, and it has a specific color schema that only the company has, and they created manual CSS for it, and they had like an actual Photoshop person create CSS that they're delivering to you so that the company can have that consistency color. Then at that point, you would want to use your own CSS, right? You would want to use the manual stuff that was provided to you so that there's a consistency within your code. So I guess it would, to answer your question, would be situation dependent.
Okay.
Awesome. All right. So we've gone over a couple of these things. Now, the next one that I want to cover is going to be pseudo classes. We talked about pseudo classes before, and we've seen pseudo classes, such as adding something like, hey, on hover, I want you to do something else. Well, what if in this case, we wanted this button that on hover, the background turns into a darker blue. So currently we have this BG blue at 200. Maybe we want to say, hey, on hover, we want the background to still be blue, but we want it to be a darker shade. So now it's going to be whenever I hover over this button, the background will be at the shade of 300 for blue. Well, let's see. If I refresh this, as soon as I hover over the button, we can see that the button background turns into a darker shade of blue. And that's how we can handle pseudo classes for Tailwind CSS. All right. Now, let's look at the quick example of how we can utilize all of this information within React, right? Let's say that I wanted something, and this is just a simple example, right? Let's say we have some sort of use state element here. And we'll just call this show. Yeah, let's start off as false. Okay. So we already have our button here. I'm not really going to change anything about our button. I am going to clean this up a little bit though. Okay, so now we have our button, and let's say I have some sort of text, right? Let's say I have a p tag, and it just has a bunch of lorem ipsum. All right. Well, now in this lorem ipsum, what we can do is we can add a class name. And instead of just adding a class name and having it in quotation marks, well, we can integrate our JavaScript code to render some form of string. So maybe we can say, hey, if show, right? So if show happens, we want you to show BG dash green 200. And otherwise, I want it to be red. So I'm going to do BD dash red dash 200. And this is altering the background color. So now we can see immediately, right? In the back, our background of our lorem ipsum, it's red because show is currently set to false. Well, maybe this is something like saying, hey, you're creating your profile, but your password needs to meet these requirements, right? And then the password, the text color for the requirements are in red. And then as each requirement is met, each one of them turns into green, right? We've seen that before, at least I've seen it whenever I'm creating a profile somewhere. Well, now what we can do is we can add an onClick function to our button. And what this onClick function can do is it can set show to not show. Okay, so we refresh this. When I hover over it, I still have my pseudo class. Now, when I click this, I expect this background text to turn into green. And if I click it again, I expect it to turn into red. And that's because this show function is turning between true or false. And by turning it between true or false, it is either rendering the background green when it is true, or the background red when it is false. Does anyone have any questions over this quick application here? No questions at all, huh?
I'll ask one, Francisco. I guess where you have class, I'm sorry, so on line 11, you have class name and you have the show, right? And then on line 17, you have class name again. Can you just go through what's going on there again? I think that's your comparison to like for if something happens, do this or do this, right?
You're talking about on line 11, right?
Yeah, line 11, and then line 11 and line 17, because I believe they're related, right? Or not?
Yeah, I can definitely break this down. Maybe do like an overview of the flow here. So when this gets rendered, right? This entire screen gets rendered. It creates a variable named show. And then show has this set show state and this show state. And then it gets initialized. So let me go ahead and comment this out real quick. So again, we have a getter and we have a setter, and then init to false, right? So its initial value of this use state is false. So anytime I run my getter, I'll see false, and I can set this value to a different value. So here in P class, when I'm trying to pass in a class name, I'm choosing which one of these two classes it is that I'm going to pass into it. So I'm saying if show, which is a Boolean variable, currently show is initialized as false. So if show, I want you to render a background of green in the shade of 200. But because show is false, it's going to then render the background of red at 200, just like we see here, right? Then it renders our lorem ipsum, it renders our p tag, and then it goes into the button. Now the button, the class names of the button, they don't have any sort of functionality. They're coming straight from Tailwind CSS, all right? The only functionality that we added to our button that is special is we added this hover function. All right, it's coming from Tailwind CSS saying on hover. So anytime I hover over the button, the background color will change from the shade of 200 to the shade of 300. So now when I hover over the button, we can see the background color turning into a darker blue. And when I hover back out, it turns back into a lighter blue. And then I added an onClick function to this button saying that anytime I click the function, it will set the value of show to the opposite of show. So if show is initialized as false, when I click on this button, it will set the value of show to the opposite of false, which is true, right? And then once this turns into true, because this is a use state, it's interacting with the virtual DOM, which means that the DOM will then run a comparison saying, hey, is there a change in the logic that we have? And there is a change because now show is true. So we'll change our background color to green rather than rendering it red. And that's how we get this effect. I click the button, Well, as soon as I click it, the virtual DOM is going to note that there's a difference. It's going to run the comparison and then re-render my HTML file. And that's how we get it to turn green.
Okay, yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. Appreciate it. I start to get a little mixed up with some of the syntax when we introduce new things, so that helps a lot.
Of course, no problem at all. All right. Any other questions regarding Tailwind CSS?
Yeah, I've got a quick one. So if you wrap that p tag in the button in a div with a class name from Tailwind CSS, would that override the styling from the p class in the button?
You're saying to add a parental division tag, right?
Yeah.
And this parental division tag would then have also a class name, something maybe like background, I don't know, purple. Something like that,
Yep.
right? So we can see that it's still following the order, right? It's saying the division, okay, well, the division has children, and the children are going to be staggered on top of the division, like as far as in depth, right? Think of the division as the bottom layer, and then on top of that comes the paragraph tag. So once the paragraph tag stacks on top, then the CSS from the paragraph tag is what we can see. So that's why we see the green being demonstrated up top. And if I click on click me, it still just changes it from red to green. Nothing changes the background of purple. Maybe I can make this a little bit of a darker shade here. Does that answer your question?
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you.
Of course. All right. If there are no other questions regarding Tailwind CSS, let's go ahead and take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and start talking about BootStrap. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll see you all in 10 minutes. All right. Welcome back, everyone. Before we took our short exercise break, we went ahead and we talked about Tailwind CSS. And Tailwind CSS is a utility library, right? We can see that we can actually specify different things. It gives us it takes away some of our control, right? It takes away the fact that some of these things come with preloaded CSS within them. But at the same time, it also gives us the ability to change a couple of attributes of it. And it gives us a little bit more control than something like BootStrap gives us. And BootStrap is a component library. So here we have the documentation for Tailwind CSS. But if we look up something like ReactBootStrap, that will take us to the ReactBootStrap site, where we can talk about different components. All right. Now, Tailwind CSS is super useful if you have the time and ability to design things and make things nice and pretty. While Bootstrap is more of, hey, you have the time, but you don't really have that much time. And there's a couple of things that you want to do. Well, in this case, Bootstrap comes in with a bunch of already built-in things. For example, comes in with an accordion that's already built in, and it gives you all the code that you need for this accordion to work. All you need to do is essentially copy and paste, and then fill in whatever it is that you needed to say, right? If you need to change things. And there's a little bit of understanding of what's going on. It has really cool features like drop downs. Right, so here's our drop down button. As soon as I click it, it gives me a couple of different things. So maybe like we saw in the navbar in the Poke API, maybe there's some sort of media query that exposes this. It has navbars already included in it with drop downs as well. And some of these navbars are even they're responsive. So there you go, right? We see that the navbar is currently showing ReactBootstrap, and then it has all these links. Well, as soon as I start squishing it, once it gets small enough, it starts showing this different display. And that's all already coming from within Bootstrap. So let's talk about Bootstrap a little bit. Let's get started. So here it tells me exactly what to do. It tells me to run npm install Bootstrap. So we already have a React project already created. I'm going to go ahead and Control C on my current terminal so that my development server stops running. And I'm just going to go ahead and install BootStrap with this command. So I'm just going to copy and paste it, npm install ReactBootStrap, bootstrap. Now we can see it installing. Right, once it's installed, I can ensure that it worked correctly by checking in package.json. If I look within dependencies, I have Bootstrap, React, ReactBootstrap, and React. And if I look at my dev dependencies, not only do I have my React stuff that I had already installed, but I also have my Tailwind CSS and that post CSS from Tailwind. So I know that both React Bootstrap and Tailwind are now currently installed. Now there's one more thing that we need to add into our index.html. Oh, I apologize. That should not be an index.html. It should be in main.jsx. So in main.jsx, I want to make sure that I import all of the styling from Bootstrap. So I'm going to go ahead and import Bootstrap dist. So this is going into the Bootstrap component within our package. It's grabbing their dist folder. Then after that, it's going to grab their CSS and then apply this specific sheet of CSS for us to be able to utilize in our projects. Okay, great. So now I have all of my dependencies. Everything is built out correctly. Now let's say that I wanted to include something like a nav bar. Well, I can come over here, go over to components. I can look at different components they have. Maybe I want a spinner. I can just simply copy this and we can see that it's giving it to me already inside of a function, right? So maybe that means that I should create a file and I should name it spinner.jsx. Okay. Well, now I can paste this code and it's saying I want to import the spinner from ReactBootstrap/spinner. If I don't want to do the /spinner, I could take it off. And then I would just have to specify, hey, I want spinner from React Bootstrap, and this will still work. But you don't want to do that because whenever you do an import this way, it's importing the entire React Bootstrap library, right? And I don't necessarily want the entire thing. I'm putting too much stress on my project. Instead, I'll just specify that the one thing that I need is the spinner. Okay, so everything comes back. It's called basic example. I'm gonna rename this to be, I don't know, my spinner. Okay, so now I can go into app.jsx and above this division, and let me actually give this division a margin top of, I don't know, 15. I think it allows me to do that. It looks like 10 is the most I can give it. Oh, interesting. It's not allowing me to give it a margin, and that's okay. Let me go ahead and, oh, don't want that. I want to make sure that I can demonstrate my spinner now. Well, all I'm going to do is I'm going to import my spinner. It's going to import it from my composers, my components folder. What shortcut allows you to edit multiple lines at once? I may need a little bit more than more context than that, Frank. All right, so now I'm importing my spinner. It's coming in from my components from the file name spinner. And now in order to use it, all I need to do is call my spinner. Well, now when I run npm run dev, and that's why it wasn't showing it to me, was because my development server wasn't currently working. Let me add that margin top 10 one more time. Okay, and there it is. There's my spinner from React Bootstrap. Notice that I didn't have to create any sort of CSS to do any animation on it. I didn't have to do any sort of JavaScript to tell it how much time it should take or how the animation should work. It's simply just working from a spinner. It knows that it's going to spin. It needs to know what kind of animation it will be and its role. So its role is a status, right? And then we see this span, which is visually hidden. I think I can change this to visual. Now we can see that it says loading. right? And it's just spinning back and forth because it's not hidden. I can bring it back. Okay. And the other thing that this spinner tells me is if I scroll all the way to the bottom of the spinner, it gives me a couple of classes that I can add into it. So for example, we have this animation. So currently the animation that we're using is border. Well, what if I want to utilize grow? What would that look like? Well, now I can go in here and I can see that that's the grow happening. All right, it's all happening within this nice table. I can give it something like size, but it looks like it only comes in one size, which is small. And I can give it a role. And it even has a small description of different things that I can do with it. Oh, and here comes our variant. So by variant, this is just referencing to the color. So if I add a variant and I make it primary, I believe that's going to turn it blue. Yep. And then there's danger for red. I think secondary turns it gray. There you go. So there's a couple of different variants here that you can utilize. The one that I like to use a lot is the warning one. So if they're doing something that should show a warning, I just use the warning sign and then that turns it into yellow. That's how we can utilize a basic spinner. Let's see, what else did we see? I know that someone else was kind of baffled by the nav bar. So if we want to see some nav bars, we can go into nav bars and let's just use this one here. All right, so now I can make a new component. I can say navbar.jsx. And what I want this to return is I want it to return the navbar. All right, so we can see that it has quite a bit of components already in it. Everything's being installed for me. Everything's being handled. Great. Well, now how do I add this navbar? I can just say, I want you to import navbar. Now, when I go here, I have this navbar. It's currently gray. I have my drop-down menu. As I extend it, that drop-down menu then turns into an actual navbar. It still has all of my information. Here. Well, now we see inside of our navbar, we see a couple of different things. See our navbar and expand it large. Well, I wonder what happens if I turn this into small. So this triggers when it will expand. So I'm saying that once it's within the screen size considered small, that's when you compress into a hamburger menu or you extend into an actual navbar. Let's see what else we have. So here we have our class name, BG, body, tertiary. Well, let's take a look at what that means in navbar. If I scroll all the way down, here's all the information that I need regarding the navbar. What I specifically want to look at is BG, all right, because that's what we're looking at. Okay, and it looks like this is just changing the class. We could either turn it from light to dark, or we can pair it with variant. Okay, so body tertiary, what happens if I turn this into dark? That didn't seem to change anything, so maybe I'm reading this wrong. Oh, I see. BG dark. Looks like I'm reading this wrong. But there should be a way to turn this into a dark mode. I just can't remember exactly how to do it. This tertiary, I wonder. Yeah, I have to figure out exactly how to change this background color specifically.
You try like BG body tertiary space BG dark.
Well, that's if it was like something like what's it called? That's if so this would work if it was something like Tailwind, right? But in this case, what we should be able to do is say background dark. And that should then change it. Wonder what happens if I take this off. Let's experiment a little bit. Okay, there you go. So that turned it into dark. Okay, and everything's still there. I just had to remove that other class because it looks like that other class was overwriting that CSS. So now I wonder what happens if I pass it in afterwards rather than before. Yep, this class name is overwriting this BG dark. But if I remove this class name here, I can turn it into dark by utilizing BG dark. So there's a couple of other things I can do. I think the one that's most challenging to use is the pop-up. So let's take a look at that. And I forgot what they are called. Modals, there you go. That's what they're called. There you go. Okay, so there's a couple of differences here. So here's the regular modal, right? But I can still click on the background and get rid of it. Here is a static modal, meaning that the background is no longer accessible to me until I click on the modal itself. And then there's also one without the animation. Here's a vertical one. This one has a grid. But let's take this vertical modal and try to apply it here. All right, so I'm going to copy this code. And then for this one, we're actually going to need some space to take a look here. So let's create a new file. And let's name it mymodal.jsx. All right, so there's a couple of things that we have to realize here. It's telling me what to do within the app itself as well. So it looks like here's how it wants me to call the modal, and it wants me to call the modal giving it a property of show and unhidden. Well, the modal itself is already set up. So let me grab anywhere where this is called and let me change it to my modal. Okay, so the modal would take in props. It would then destructure those set props and it would utilize it. Right, we could send a couple of other things, but then it has this button as well to hide the property. All right. So now I understand how the modal is working. But I do want to export said modal. So I'm going to go ahead and say export default my modal. Okay, so now the modal is being exported. Now let's take a look at this portion. I don't need any of this. But what I will need is this information. I'm going to come over to app.jsx and I'm going to paste the following. So now I have a button that's a primary color and it's calling on this function called setModal. Now that setModal will turn it into true. And we can see we can have a modal here and it's saying, hey, should I be showing? Well, when I click on this button, it will trigger the use state saying, yes, you should show, because this will turn into true. Now, in my modal, when I click on the button of modal.footer, it's saying, hey, when this is clicked, I want you to trigger the onHide property. Well, if I look back at app.jsx, my modal.onHide would trigger setting my modal back to false. So now I'm just going to make that use state. So I'm going to say const. And I think it's called modal show. So modal show. And then set modal show. And I'm going to make that into a use state that is initialized as false. All right, so let's take a look at what that looks like. And let me save this file so that it's a little cleaner. So now when I come over to my application, seems like I have an error. Oh, so I'm getting this error saying button is not defined. And that's because I'm not utilizing a regular HTML button. I'm using a button from ReactBootStrap. So that means that I need to import button. And there it tells me where I'm importing it from. I'm importing it from Bootstrap. And then I'm also calling on my modal, but I don't think I ever imported it. So there should be another error saying my modal is not defined. Here we can see on-caught reference, my modal is not defined. So now I can import my modal from .components, my modal. Okay, so there you go. Now we finally get it showing up. I have this button saying launch vertically centered modal. And when I click it, it's turning that into true, allowing my modal to show. My modal header, my body. And when I click on this button close, it's going to change that set modal to that show modal property to false. And that's what takes away my modal. All right. Does anyone have any questions about this so far?
When you imported my modal, it seems like it auto-filled. Did that happen?
Yeah, when I imported my modal, it did autofill. It was able to recognize that it's coming, that it's something I'm exporting here on line 32. So because I'm exporting by default, I'm able to find it within my module. And that's why in app.jsx, it can autofill.
Cool.
Awesome. All right. So now I've created a couple of components from ReactBootStrap. I've utilized a little bit of Tailwind CSS. And now the next thing that I really want to cover is going to be grid. Now this is really useful, or at least I think it's really useful, because a lot of people have problems with making their sites reactive or being able to squish content whenever they're working within their Vite projects. So what I always do is whenever I create a component, I always utilize the grid functionality that comes with Bootstrap. So let me see if I can find it. It's not in tables, is it? No, it's not tables. Oh, look at that. They have a carousel as well. That's nice.
I think it's under layout.
You think it's in layout? Let me see.
Oh, like back at the top. I'm sorry.
Oh, there it is. Grid. Nice. Thank you. So here's the grid system, right? You can create a container. This container will be flexible, and then you could have rows holding columns. So let's grab this real quick. And let's bring this in to our app.jsx. Actually, I'm just going to comment all of this out so that it's not bothering us. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and import container. Oh. I am going to import row. And I am going to import, I think it's column. Make sure that is all correct here. Oh. Seems I'm utilizing this ESM portion that I don't need. Okay, now let me make sure I don't have any errors so far. Okay, no errors. Good. So now the very first thing that I could do is I can create a container that has a row, and I can name this row my header. Then I can have a row that will be representing my body. And then I can have a row that could be representing my footer. Right, so there's my 3 rows. I can give my row properties all different classes. So here we go. Let me go ahead and do that real quick. Um, okay, so I have all of that information. And I could just simply, and actually I think there's a way for me to display all of the text within a row centered. Let me see if I can find that down below here. Okay, so here's the prefixes that I can give a row. So I could tell it that it's a row. I can give it the size that it's supposed to be. The number of columns it can have. Okay, so it doesn't look like there's an automatic way for me to just give it the text align center. So I'll actually have to do that myself. Let me close these modals out. So I gave it the class of a row. So now I can go to index.css and say a row, and I can just give it text align center. And that did not work. Interesting. Let me see. Okay, so that comes in with a row, comes in with display flex. Oh, it's because of the display flex. Got it. So justify content center. How's that? Nice. Right, and now I can see how this one container right has these 3 rows. Where's the container? Okay. So there's my one container. We can see that it has a couple of margins already included in it. Right, it has some margins, it has some paddings. And then within it, it has a row. And each row is exactly the same size. I don't need to dictate that myself. Well, now the cool thing about it is that I can make it small as well. And I can see it just being pretty much reactive, right? It's able to adjust to whatever screen size I have. I can change it to different things, and it's still going to be able to squeeze it and make it all fit in somewhat of an order of what I want it to. I can definitely go into app.jsx and give it a couple of columns as well. Let's say that my body had 3 columns, right? Let's say my body has 3 columns. So here's, I can lengthen, right? We have the left side. We have the news feed, I guess. And then finally, we have a column that's like the right side. Well, if I go back to my project here, Oh, let me take this off. So here's our header, and now we see the left, newsfeed, and right. They're all occupying the same space. It may not look like it, but here we can see left, newsfeed, and right. And all of them are 144 pixels. Right? Regardless of how big my page is, it will always remain the same distance between all of them. So 240, 240, and 240. Now, how do I change that? Well, we can see here that we can tell our columns how much space they're going to occupy. So here's my prefix for my column. And I can tell it, hey, you're going to occupy 3. You are going to occupy 6 spaces. And you will occupy 3. Now, by doing that, we're going to see that I just changed a little bit of my site's reaction. Well, now let's take a look here. Here's my row. Oh, where's my row? It's not going to let me analyze my whole row, but we can see that the left side is now currently holding 135. If I go to the right side is also holding 135, but the middle is now holding 270 pixels. So it's dividing the entire row into 9 sections, or sorry, into 12 sections. It's giving 3 to the left and 3 to the right, and it's affording 6 sections to the one newsfeed. Right? And then after this is just styling. So if I want my container to be 100 view height, I could change that myself. I could change each one of these rows to be a specific portion of height from my container. And then this way I could just have my entire site be reactive to sizes without having to worrying about content overlapping or squishing on top of one another, as long as I'm not using something like position absolute or position relative to try to change that information. All right. Does anyone have any questions over BootStrap, BootStrap components, or different things that they can use with BootStrap to make their sites more reactive? Bootstrap's pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, so Francisco, Bootstrap, I guess just comparing it to the Tailwind. Tailwind's more so for styling, and then Bootstrap's more for adding like functionality with some styling. Is that accurate? Or?
So they're both for styling, right? But the main difference is that Bootstrap comes with the entire component already built. It comes with, hey, here's our standard. Like, here's what we all, the React Bootstrap community agreed that this would look like. You could just grab this entire component and put it into your project. That way you don't have to worry about styling things from scratch. Now, you could give it your own style still, but we're providing you our template that you could just manipulate. While Tailwind is, hey, we know that you don't want a template already for you, but you want default styling provided to you so that you can apply it to your own divisions or your own components that you're creating. So Tailwind is giving you a utility tool set, right? So it's giving you things that you can add, classes that you can add that will change different styling on your program, while React Bootstrap is a component library. It's giving you components that are already built out with the set styling provided as well. Does that answer your question, Robert?
Yes, thank you.
Of course. All right, so then the question becomes, why would I utilize one or the other, right? Or when should I utilize one or the other? So React Bootstrap is generally used for, if you want to utilize something that's a reusable UI, or you want to create an application rather quickly, but you don't have that much time and effort to spend into styling, you could just grab a couple of Bootstrap components, throw them in there and say, hey, well, this is what we have. And then later on, maybe we can go back and change it so that it's a little bit more unique rather than having all these Bootstrap components. While Tailwind CSS is definitely for a more dynamic and experienced developer when it comes to front-end development, right? You're able to alter specific things. You want a certain set of styling per component rather than an entire component provided for you. All right, and that's going to conclude our lecture over utility libraries and component libraries. React Bootstrap being our component library and Tailwind CSS being our utility library. Does anyone have any questions over any of the topics that we covered today?
After you installed the React Bootstrap, what did you change right after that?
In main.jsx, I imported the Bootstrap. I believe in my curriculum it says to do it on index.jsx, but that is a typo that I will be fixing immediately.
Okay, all right, that's what I figured. All right, thank you. And then that was it. And then started getting the stuff right from Bootstrap after that.
Yes, right after that, you're ready to go.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Awesome. I will go ahead and stop the recording at this